This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So far we discussed the concept of the flow reference, right? Flow reference, subflow, flow. So those concepts we reference means what I mean is you will develop a logic in multiple flows, and we refer one flow from the other flow. Okay. Now today I like to discuss about the HTTP request component. HTTP request component and connecting the flows using HTTP protocol and the VM protocol. That is the main intention of today's flow, today's class. Okay. So why we use HTTP request component is if you want to call any REST-based service that is exposed on HTTP protocol or any web service, any web application that exposed in HTTP protocol, you use the HTTP request component, right? So in the component palette, we have two HTTP components. One is a listener component and the request component. Until now, we exposed our flows, means we develop a flow in your mule and we configure an HTTP listener component, right? On 80, 81 or 80, 82, whatever the port, and we exposed this flow so that our clients can call this flow. Right? This is listener component. If you configure a port, it's keep on listening on the port. Whenever the request comes, it takes the request and process the request. Right? Now we have the HTTP request component. So request component is to invoke other service, service. If your team, your internal to your team or your partner team expose some application on some port, you want to call that, use HTTP request component, right? I will configure a small application. Like today, I like to take one web service like this. So this is publicly available service, JSON placeholder.typecode.com/users. You can also check it out. Okay. So it is a REST service. It is a dummy REST service. So it will returns all the user information. This is first user and the second user, like that. Okay, this user information in a JSON format. Okay, so I want to configure, I want to invoke this service from the mule flow, right? So I'm going to here. I created one project, HTTP request demo. So here inside the project, see, I configure HTTP listener. His listener is at let me open the listener configuration. Listener is configured at 8083, and the path is, I didn't give any path, just root path. Okay, and next I configured HTTP request component. This is HTTP request component, is available in the component palette. HTTP request. If you go to HTTP module, you can able to see the HTTP related components. I have to drag this HTTP request component over here, right? And you want to configure this HTTP request component to invoke this service, right? So take the service URL, JSON placeholder.typecode.com/users, and come over here, and in this configuration, HTTP request configuration, click this one plus, right? And you can give the host like this. Let me copy this URL. Not copied properly. One moment. My keyboard is disconnected. One moment. Okay. One sec. My laptop keyboard is also not working.
Try with mouse. Right click and select it with mouse.
Yes. Okay, cancel it. Let me open. So already configured it. It's like here, right? Okay, now it's typing fine. Okay. So in the host place, you need to configure the host name. So in this case, the host name is, this is the host name, JSON, remove the HTTP protocol, and here from here to here, this is the host name, right? So where actually this service is hosted, and this is the host name. You configure the host over here, and port is not required, internally taken care of. It will invoke the port. And next thing is, I change something like, I all do default settings. I don't want anything proxy like that. And in the path settings, /users, right? This is /users. So I configure this service over here, right? And now if I run this project, I can able to by invoking this URL, this listener URL, and I'm able to see the output of this service, right? Because if we invoke this your listener, it will call this web service, and the response from that web service return to the client. Okay. It's installing. So it's deployed. Let me hit this one. No, I'm not able to. I'm hitting that HTTP localhost 8083. I configured that one, my local machine. So the mule flow got invoked, and that HTTP request is called, right? And I'm able to see this, the response from the for that web service, JSON type code web service, right? So this example clear so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So internally what happens is when I request this URL, this localhost 8083, the HTTP request comes over here, right? And this listener converts that HTTP request to the mule event, and mule event is provided to the HTTP request object, right? And HTTP request object once again transforms the mule event to HTTP request object, and that invokes this service, right? And HTTP response comes back to the HTTP request object, and what happens is that HTTP that response is transferred back to and converts back to a mule event, and mule event given back to this HTTP listener. That one transform back to HTTP response, and that is given to here. Okay. Coming back to our so this is the configuration. HTTP with JSON type model configuration. The configuration looks like this, right? This is simple REST service invocation.
REST.
If any HTTP service invocation. Now, similarly, yeah, any doubt? Okay, I have two flows. Okay, I configured two flows. One flow I configured at 8081 port, and second flow I configured at 8084 port. Okay, maybe you can configure with the same port, maybe different path. That doesn't matter. Okay, but you have two flows configured on different HTTP configurations. Now I want to send a request from one flow to other flows, right? Because this you expose HTTP service, and this is also an HTTP service, and internally from one flow I'm calling this second flow, right? Now in case of rather than calling external third-party service, now I'm calling the mule flow that is exposed on 8084 port using HTTP request object, right? In this case also I can connect the two flows, right? But if you observe this difference between flow reference and this kind of invocation, right? In case of flow reference, we will ignore the event source, right? And whatever the event processors inside the calling flow, those are all they all come and execute over here, and those are all become part of this flow. This flow you call as a flow A, and this is flow B, right? If you in case of HTTP request object, if there is a flow reference, in that case it will only take the event processors into consideration, and these all processors will come and execute in this place, right? If you are invoking through a protocol, right, HTTP is a protocol, then what happens is you will invoke the source. Okay, so it is like flow reference is always internal communication. It's even though these two flows are internal, if you are invoking through the event source, it is not difference between your invoking external service or internal service, right? So in case if you invoke other flow using HTTP request object, this HTTP request listener is configured. You can call HTTP request object, right? So then what happens is there are some kind of transformations happen. First, from the client, right? It requests the HTTP request object, HTTP request message, HTTP message, and this guy transforms the HTTP message to the mule event, and mule event is given to your HTTP request object, right? Request object transforms the mule event to HTTP request, again HTTP message, because this listener understands only HTTP message, right? And that HTTP message taken by this listener, and it transform again to the mule event. And that event is given to event processors in the second flow, and they will process that message, and they will give the mule event back to this listener. Once again, it transforms that mule event HTTP message object, HTTP response or message. The response is given to this HTTP component. It's again transformed HTTP message to a mule event, and that is given to the next event processors, if any. Okay. So this kind of message transformations happen in case of this kind of invocation. In case of flow reference, there is no message transformation, directly whatever, because all this event process become the part of the calling flow. There is message transformation is not required. The same mule event is passed. Okay, in case of flow reference, the same mule event is passed across all the components. There is no change in mule event. Here, the mule event is getting changed. Okay, so it's still any questions on this concept? We go into the demo. Clear, right? Okay, let me configure a application around this concept. I create a project connecting flows HTTP. In this, I'm creating two flows. Right. So I'm configuring the listener. On 84, and path I will give as 1. Actually, this path I will give as 2. Sorry. I'm using the same port 8084, right? 8084, the same port, but I want to change the path as 1. Right. So here, using the HTTP request object, before that I will want to create some variable. Set variable. I will print some logger. Okay, the set variable. I'm creating a variable named city. It's logger, right? Okay. City is I'll pass a query parameter from the URL attributes dot query params dot city. Okay, and here in the variable I create a variable using the country attributes dot headers dot country. I will pass some header and create a country variable. Okay, here In the request, I'm requesting the second flow. Okay. So I'm calling the second flow. Second flow is configured at path 2, right? So here, in this request configuration, the host is localhost and port is here. You need to give the port because you are specifically exposing a port, right? So the port is 8084. And the path is /. So see, this URL is built over here. Okay. So if you can directly want to invoke this flow, you need to give this URL as 8084/2. So this one you are constructing and you're calling through the request object. Okay. And now I call request object. I want to print in the logger. I want to print the same variable that is sending from the client. Flow B, I call this as flow B. Okay. And I put one more logger. Here I want to print the variable. Okay. And after this invocation, I'll put one more logger. Okay. I want to print the variable also. Okay. So this is my flow, right? I'm just deploying this flow. Now just give me your points just. So am I able to print the city over here? Shiva, Ravi, you can, yeah, Rama, tell me. City.
Yeah, Srini, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm able to hear you.
Yeah, so we need to first send a request from the client, right? From
Client,
the
yeah. Yeah, whatever client, HTTP, ERI, Insomnia, or ARC or browser. So whatever we need to send a request to this flow.
yeah.
This flow, while sending the request, I'm sending two parameters. One is one header parameter and query parameter. Okay. So whatever the parameter I'm sending, header parameter, I'm creating a variable from that.
Okay.
From query parameter, just printing the query parameter.
Yeah.
Okay. Afterwards, I'm calling the second flow. In the second flow, I'm trying to print the query parameter and header parameter. The query parameter, in sense, I'm trying to print this one city, whatever query parameter sent from the client, right? That I'm trying to print. Okay. And the variable also I'm trying to print, right? So can I access the variable over here? The variable I created here, can I access it over here? The first question. Can I access a variable that created one flow That variable can I create in another flow?
Mm,
No, I think.
Yeah,
Because
it's no,
no
right?
flow reference.
Scope of this thing is only the flow. If it is flow reference over here, then
We
we
can
can,
use.
we can,
yeah,
because these two become part of this top flow, right?
yeah.
So that is the funda over here. And let me see the console deployed. So let me hit using the postman. It's not a postman. Some fundamental concepts we need to explore over here. Uh, the first concept is the about what happened to the query parameters. Okay, after request, after HTTP request, what happened to the query parameters or header parameters that is sent by the client? So this is the client application that invoking the mule flow. I'm just guys observe very carefully. Right. So here I'm creating the fresh request here. HTTP localhost. The first flow. Sorry, localhost. The first flow is exposed at 8081 or 8082. Just let me double check once. 8084. Okay. Localhost colon 8084/1, and I'm sending one query parameter CT is equal to
Srini,
value.
sorry to
Yeah, no
interrupt.
problem.
Shiva got disconnected and he's trying to reconnect and he's just messaged waiting for organizer to acceptance.
Really? Let me check once.
He sent a message in the group.
I didn't observe. Yeah. Thank you. Alright. Yeah, I'm not able to see Shiva in the participants list.
He's trying to reconnect it since he's just messaged in the WhatsApp group that that's request.
Yeah, thank you. Let me check it once. Waiting for organizer acceptance. It is in here. Accept the request now. How come? Meeting request. Strangely, I didn't get any meeting request. Just please wait me for 2 minutes. Hope he is able to join now. Okay. All right. So this is a URL, right? I'm just configuring the query parameters, and header parameter has the country and value as India. Okay. Yeah. So Shiva, just we didn't discuss anything much after deployment. I think you disconnected when the deployment is happening. So the application got deployed. We're just invoking the first flow. Okay.
Okay.
I configured the query parameter as the city is Bangalore, and I configured one header parameter country India. I'm just invoking the flow, the first flow, right? So nothing you need to analyze over here is what happens to the headers that is sent by the client in the initial invocation. So this is the initial invocation. The client sending the headers like the city and the country, two parameters, right? So does these two parameters reach the second flow or not? That is the first concern. Okay. The first flow definitely they will reach, right? First flow cities bank they reach as a header parameter, query parameter. You can see over here. So if you see the console, we have several logger statements. City is equal to Bangalore. Country is null in. Okay, country is null. I think I did print country before exit request, and country is equal to null. Here should print country. Okay, let me check. Headers dot country, the spelling same. COUNTY. Okay. Miley. COUNTRY. Therefore, it is coming as another. That's okay. Once again. Let me analyze this latest log statements from here. See, city is equal to Bangalore and country is equal to null in flow B. Okay. So what I mean for first logger, before the step request, the first logger able to print city. Once we invoke the second flow, right? In the second flow, first we analyze the query parameters. Are we able to access the query parameters or not? Right. In the second flow, if I try to print the city and city is equal to null in flow B, right? City is equal to null in flow B means we lost the parameter. Okay, that's fine. And second flow got executed and the response will come back to here HTTP request object. After that, I want to print the parameter. HTTP city is this one after HTTP request. We'll see that one. City is null after HTTP request. Right. So what happens is when you find any outbound call, this is the call is outbound call because the request going out. Okay, inbound call means this is inbound. Request is coming inside your flow, you call as inbound. When request is going out of your flow, when message is going out of flow, you call as outbound. This is one kind of terminology. Okay. Whenever you find an outbound call in a flow, you will lose the header information that is sent by the client. That is a fundamental over here. You need to keep in mind. Okay. What all the header information, no matter it's query parameter or header parameter, whatever. Because why we lose information? We need to analyze little deeper. If you analyze little deeper, right? Why you are losing information? See, assume. Okay, pay attention. Please assume over here. This is very important concept. From the client, we're sending a message, right? This message contains HTTP message contains two parts, right? Header part and the payload part. Header part we contain all these query parameters, header parameter, all the stuff, right? And once it reaches the HTTP listener, it will transform it to a mule event, right? Mule event, all the headers is copied to the attributes part. All the payload it copied to the payload part, right? It constructs a mule event and given to the this processors. So here I will create a variable out of the one header and just here this component print the one of the header. Until that is fine, and the same mule event is passed over here, right? So once a mule event passed over here, what this event processor doing is it will sending an HTTP request to second flow. Okay, so it won't send the mule event as the mule event exact mule event to second flow, because second flow HTTP listener understands only HTTP object. So this HTTP request will again build a HTTP message out of the mule event. Okay, so in that case what it will do is it won't copy the attributes that is there in this attribute section to the mule headers. It only copy the payload to payload. Okay, so it won't copy the attributes. And if you configure any attributes from in this configuration, any headers in this configuration, that will go into headers. You can configure the query parameters and header parameters in this configuration. I will show you. Those things will go as part of header. What actually the client sends, that header information is there in the as part of the attributes, that is not copied to the header of this thing. Okay, so this HTTP message is sent to the second flow, right? And second flow gets the HTTP message. Once again, it transfers mule event that is given to this logger component. The construction of mule event is same. All the header is go to the attribute section and payload section. But this attribute section, that header section not contains the actual header information sent by the client. Okay, so we will lose the attributes, we lose the header when we encounter the outbound endpoint, right? And this flow will execute and response back to this one. Okay, and now after this endpoint, whatever the event processors, those will receive the payload or attributes that is returned from this flow. Okay, the original payload, original headers, those replaced by the response of the calling flow. Okay, got it? Confusing? You want me explain once again the entire flow?
Any after request, we don't have any headers?
After request, right?
Yes.
After means what happens is we do have headers, that the headers configured as part of request configuration, not the headers that
What
is
we
coming
have
from
in
the
the
client.
from the client. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the actual header sent by the client or as part of the attribute section, right? Okay, So while sending out, it will construct the HTTP message object. In that object, it will take only payload into consideration and put the payload as in the payload section. And in the header section, the headers you configured as per request object, those are placed into headers, not the attributes are headers. Okay. Therefore, when we encounter any HTTP request, any outbound endpoint, you will lose the headers. The interesting point is here you configure the variable, right? Okay, but variable you can able to access over here, the same variable I configured over here. But even no matter how many outbound endpoints, the variable still you will access after the call, HTTP call. In the last logger, I print the let me. In the last logger here, I print country is equal to was.country, and this is the last one. This after HTTP request. Okay, country is India. Okay, so there is no impact on the variables, right? Variables will persist until end of the flow. Okay, they won't change. Variables won't change. But in case of attributes, right, when we encounter any outbound endpoints, the attributes will change. The original attributes will not be available after the outbound endpoint. That is a fundamental. Right? So if you want those attributes to be persist, then you need to store those attributes in a variable so that you can make use that that value after the HTTP call also, after outbound call also. In that case, we need to store them in a variable like this. Those attributes are very important. Whatever the client sending, the initial attributes are very important. You don't want to lose them. In that case, you need to configure a variable and store those attributes. Okay, if you don't store, once the inbound outbound end call is there, your attributes no more available after the outbound call. Okay. Are you okay?
Yeah. Sai, how we maintain the correlation? Because
Correlation sense.
we'll have, okay, for example, in same minute, I have 10 transactions triggered to the listener and 10 transactions triggered to the request. So
10 transactions triggered to the listener.
to the second flow. From request, it triggered to the second flow.
For loop,
Okay.
Okay, now second flow will send the response. How first flow will identify, okay, this response is for the request I triggered. How it will correlate for the incoming request and receive response.
Okay. So for everything, right, there is a message ID and correlation ID.
Okay.
Let me show you that one. Question. Here in this thing. Okay. Okay, what your question is like this, right? So you have a flow. Right, we have a flow, and to this listener at the same point, at the same moment, you got 10 requests, right? So if you got a 10 request, 10 different mule objects will be created, right? And we invoke the second flow.
Yes.
Right. So it's not like they will invoke very serially, like as a request come randomly they invoke, right? Okay, and they randomly they invoke, and the response from this flow is sent back to this request object. After processing, the response sent back to request object. But this will block until the second flow executes. Right.
Right.
Right. So every message in that case, you have a message ID and a correlation ID. Like for entire this message, this event, your message ID, and you have a correlation ID, because for this processing, see, you got you got a 10 requests, 10 different requests to this flow. Okay, and for each request there is a separate request to invocation is happening over, right?
Right.
Okay, so there is a there will happen in a this call as this invocation you call as a the separate context will be there for each request invocation. Okay, there is going to separate thread, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the first request executes and this response executes, and this that sent back to a. This is not happening in all the requests won't execute in a single thread. A separate thread for each kind of a execution.
Right.
Okay. So there is no matter of the correlation is not required actually, right? If it is happening in independent thread, execution happening in independent thread.
The first process will have a main thread, and it will execute a one worker thread. That is the second flow, and main thread will be waiting for the response from.
Yeah.
Okay. Now main thread until worker thread respond. Main thread will do other job also. It will take the request. It will take the request of another transaction and a process. When worker thread send the response, then main thread will pick the worker thread response again. And then generally in TIBCO, what it will do, it will have the correlation ID. With correlation ID, it will map, okay, this is the task, and it will process it.
Right. Right, Shiva. But here the independent invocation is there. Okay.
Okay. Can we see what is the request triggered from flow 1 to flow 2? From logs, can we see the complete request?
Yeah, we can. Now here this request, right? Here in the logger, you want to see the complete request. What you can do is you can just put empty logger. Okay.
Okay.
Now let me test again. Started. Now see, right? This is the output of an logger. So you can see all the parameters. Request path is equal to 2. Okay, the entire thing. What query parameters you passed, URL parameters you passed, all the things from first.
Also,
yeah. Right.
Okay. In the logger, you didn't configure anything, right? But it is printing everything.
Yeah, if you don't configure anything, it'll print everything.
Okay.
In the first logger, I didn't configure anything here, right? So that is output.
Right.
Yeah. You want to see the entire thing, you don't do anything, though it will print all the query parameters, URI parameters, headers, all the stuff. Okay. So in the second logger I
And in,
configured, therefore I just configured only this one only different.
right. In logger we have a level like info, debug.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah, what exactly is it, Sai? Is there
So
any?
info logger is for see logs of only information kind of thing. Means see if while you're developing a project, right, you can do so much logging activity. Okay.
Okay.
So what happens is logging is an expensive activity. Okay. So if you're doing so much too much logging, it will degrade your performance of application.
Right.
Right. Then if you put the info as a default logging, it will log everything. Every log statement it will log.
Okay.
Now you don't want to print an info logs. You want to print only, you will segregate the
Error.
log statements as part of the CVRT, right?
Oh, right.
So you will configure some log statements when you get an error in a exception area.
Okay.
So you want to print only those logs, then you need to configure as error log level.
Okay.
Right. So only limited logs will be printed, your application performs better. Right.
Okay. So if we select it automatically identify. If it is error, log it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can segregate into error log. Now at the logging configuration, you need to tell what kind of logs you want to print.
Okay.
This I configured this info log, right? Okay. Now there is a log4j XML file is there. In the log4j XML file, you need to tell what kind of log statements you want to print in when application is up and running. Okay. In that log4j XML, you mention I want to print only error logs. I want to print only debug logs, like that. It will print only those logs. Okay. While developing application, we will configure many info logs, right? Very few error logs, right?
Okay.
After deployment, you got some issue and you want to solve that issue. The error logs are not sufficient to troubleshoot that issue. Then what we can do is we will turn to info level and we will run the request, and so many logs are get printed, then easily troubleshoot the issue. Okay. Afterwards, you can again change the log level to error and you can deploy it again. Right? Got it, Shiva?
Yes. Yeah. Sai.
Thank you. Then here. So here we need to, while invoking a other flow using HTTP request object, right? In the request configuration, if you go to request configuration here, and there is a method is there, and here the query parameters, header parameters, URI parameters, you are all configured over here. Yeah. So if you configure these things here, see here the correlation ID is there, Shiva, what you asked, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So here you can whatever parameters you configure over here, those become a part of the HTTP header.
Okay.
Okay. That and payload is what a payload is from the mule event. You pick the payload. Okay. The headers will pick from here in this from this configuration. Right. So until this point, you have mule event. That mule event contains attributes, payload, and variables. Only take the payload from there and headers from here, and it invoke the second request, second floor listener. Okay. Is Rama, Ravi, are we good? Any doubts so far?
Srini, so this request connector, right? So
Yeah.
will pass the payload that is received from the first client, I mean the first listener, and
Correct.
here
Yeah.
we can edit metadata, like any attributes that we want to pass on to the next flow to execute. So
Yeah.
while doing so, we can edit the payload also, right? Like, I mean, if you want to add
Yeah.
over here in this configuration.
Edit in sense, no request is no not want to process anything on the payload. You want to edit, you want to edit before the request object.
Okay.
Okay, you want to edit the request, whatever client from the client, then you can put some processing over here or the transform message, whatever, and after that you need to send to the the responsibility of this request object is only communication to the external world, kind of this one. Okay, it won't process any request.
Okay.
Sign the body, if I add 2 fields in the body,
Okay.
and from
Okay.
listener I am getting 10 fields, for example. 10 fields I am getting from listener, and in the request I want to send only 2 fields.
From the body.
From the body, yeah. From the payload, in the
Okay.
request I'm getting 10 fields, but in the request I'm sending, I want to send only 2 fields. So how I will map those things using transform message only,
Before
or
sending the request, you need to transform the message like that. You transform message. You need to remove the things you don't want, and you want to filter out whatever thing you want to send. That thing you need to build the request, build the payload before the request object
okay.
using transform message component.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is sent to this client. That's sent to second service.
And right side we have input and output column, right? Right side.
One moment. Right side.
No, in
Yeah,
the down. Is it editable, or
it's not editable. Only
input also not editable?
yeah.
Okay,
Right. You will message.
right. Just for our reference, maybe it
Yeah.
will show.
Yes. Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I'll tell you one more thing here. See, what happens is the client sends some payload over here. Client sends some payload. Okay. And when you invoke an outbound endpoint, right, you're invoking a different service, your local service or any third party service, right? And you get the response back from this service. Okay. So from this response, okay, from this payload, your existing payload is overridden, right? So until this point, you have a payload that is sent by your original client, right? Once you invoke a different service, this payload is overwritten from the response of that service, right? From after this one, and from this point onwards, the payload is the response that's coming from the service, right? So sometimes you don't want like that. Okay. What your requirement is, you want to continue the same payload that is coming from the client, original client. So whatever the response that is coming from this calling service, you want to store that in a variable. Okay. In that case, you need to configure a variable called a target variable. So we want to store a target response in a variable, right? That is target variable. If you configure a target variable over here, the thing is your payload is not overridden. Okay, the response is copied to a variable. This is called as a message enricher pattern, right? So what you're doing, you're enriching your message by adding the response variable. You're enriching your message. You're not disturbing your message. You're not means replacing the message. Okay, so let me configure a target variable. So for that case, I will I do one thing. I print the payload. The payload. I print the payload. Payload before call. So this is a payload sent by the client, right? And in this thing, there is an advance, there is a target variable. Okay, if you target variable, what I'm doing is variable name is response from call. I'm creating a variable called response from call. In that variable, I'm storing the response. What response I'm storing? The response coming out from the HTTP service, right? Okay. And afterwards, I'm configuring one more logger. In this logger, after service call, payload after service call, service call, payload, and response from service call is where's dot response from call. Right. So as I configure the target variable, my payload is not overridden. Whatever the client original payload, that will be retained. Okay, and the response will copy to a target variable. Ravi, Rama, Shiva are able to follow this concept, target variable concept?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. Now we'll invoke the flow again with the payload, with while post this payload now, because I want to post body some test payload for sample test payload. Sample from client. Some test payload. Yeah.
Can we configure this target variable even for the flow reference also?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so many components, but so many components we can configure target variable. It is a generic concept.
Okay.
And now sample payload from client sending. Now see. So payload after service call. What happened? This thing, right? This thing. Payload before call. It's not printed, huh? I'm not seeing this one. Payload before call. Strange. Acha. Here, payload before call. Sample payload from client. Okay. And payload after call. This is a payload after calls. Right? Payload after call. After service call. This one. And response from service call is the this one. Response, actually we are not sending any response, right? So here you can put some set payload over here, you can send the response that is stored into that that variable. Okay. You want to send some variable you want to store into that one, you can send something like response from service, just type in service. This logger is printing so much information. Let's quickly execute this flow. So if I execute this flow, see the loggers again. So response from this one, this is the response from second flow. So it is stored into the target variable. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So that is that's all for today. I'm going to discuss a VM component also, but it's not happened. We'll discuss the VM component in next session. Okay.
Srini,
Yeah.
so after request connector, like in the first
Yep.
flow, if
Right.
we have any message process that takes payload input, that payload is still from the first listener, right? Not the response from the second flow, because we stored that in a target variable.
Right.
Okay. So
The
if we
second flow
want to make
response.
use of
Yep.
that, if we want to make use of that response from second service, we have to assign the target variable value.
Right.
One
Yes, we
different.
need to retrieve from the target variable in
Okay.
this case. Okay. It is not a by default behavior. You want to store the response in a variable, then you need to configure a target variable.
Okay. If we don't configure the target variable, the response from the second flow will be overwritten, and that
Exactly.
that is assigned as default payload. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The response second flow is overridden on top of the payload. So your original payload will be overridden. It's no more available.
Okay.
Got it right?
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Then see you tomorrow.
Sorry, one
Yeah.
second. Sai,
No,
can you
no
select
problem.
logger beside the request on the first flow?
Yeah.
First flow.
Okay. Yeah.
After
This one. Yeah.
yes. So here we can use right side. Can we under the variables I can see the target variable also, or
Yeah. Under the variables. One moment. Response from call target variable also.
okay. Response from call. Okay.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, clear.
Right.
And the
Okay, then.
transform message
Yeah.
we will discuss in upcoming classes, right?
Yeah, sure, definitely. We will have detailed discussion of transform message component. That is very
Okay.
important component.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Then. Okay. Chalo, take care. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.